On day 12, we're going to look in this area of downtown and see several sites, and then move out to this area where we'll finish up the day. First, we'll take the subway downtown and eat at Lincoln's Waffle House for breakfast. We'll start the day at Lincoln's Waffle House, then move over to Ford's Theater before heading to Peterson's home. The only thing original on the Ford Theater is the brick facade. The rest of the building is a replica which was finished in 1968. The theater is now part of the Park Service, and this is what it looked like shortly after the assassination. Most people wouldn't come there after the association, and so it had to be sold to the Park Service. And downstairs is a small museum where you can see such things as the suit Lincoln was wearing that night. Also, you can see a pillow from the Peterson house that's stained with his blood, the derringer that was used to shoot him, and also you can see here the costume that he wore on the way to his first inauguration because they were going to kill him, and the hat he wore that night in the Smithsonian. Office seekers came from everywhere and were one of his problems. It looked like this in 1846 and aged rather rapidly. His wife, Mary Todd Lincoln, was with him, but they had left the children at home, including Tad. The play they were seeing was Our American Cousins, kind of like the Beverly Hillbillies in some ways. John Wilkes Booth was one of the most famous actors of the time period. His original plan was to kidnap Lincoln and take him to Richmond for ransom. The plan changed to an assassination after the second inaugural address. He was well known at the theater and spent some time in the bar next door before the assassination. 8 other people were convicted in conspiracy with him. Lewis Powell was supposed to kill Secretary of State William Seward, and although he injured him severely with a knife and 4 of his family members, he did not succeed in killing him. He was tried and hung. David Harold went with Powell to kill the Secretary of State and later acted as a guide for Booth as he fled. He was arrested with Booth at the bar. George Alderotz was to guide them through the marshes when they kidnapped the president, but later, as the plans changed, he was sent to kill the vice president, but got drunk instead and never showed up. Mary Surratt allowed them to use her boarding house as a plotting place and was a courier carrying various things. She was the first woman executed in the United States. Her son, John, was a courier for the Confederates, and he was in Canada at the time and therefore not arrested, even though he was one of the major conspirators. Michael O'Loughlin was a childhood friend of Booth who was recruited but never really did anything, so he turned himself in and he was imprisoned for life. Samuel Arnold had second thoughts, left D.C., but was implicated in papers found in Booth's room and was imprisoned for life. Dr. Mudsrow was not very clear. He could have been just a country doctor that happened to have been there when Booth needed attention to his leg, but there was also evidence that he and Booth had known each other for some time. Edmund Spangler was an unusual case. He was a stagehand at the theater that Booth knew from his business there, and so when he asked him to watch his horse, he didn't see anything wrong with that. He did get a 6-year jail sentence, but was not killed. The date was April the 14th, 1865, and it was Good Friday that Lincoln was killed on. This is the presidential booth where he was shot. Now, the stage was not set up like this. This is an active theater that puts on several plays a year, and Come From Away is the current show showing, not what was showing when Lincoln was assassinated. There's no presidential security at that time, so when President Lincoln and Mary arrived, they sat down. One of her friends, Clara Harris, and Major Henry Rathbone, her fiancé, were with them.
Once the presidential party was seated, then the play on stage resumed. Act 3, Scene 2. Essentially, it was the last big moment of laughter before the play. And when the large crowds not only began laughing raucously, they were also stamping their feet on the wooden floors and clapping. John Wilkes Booth was able to use that crowd noise in order to muffle the sounds of the gunshot. He simply entered one of the doors near Abraham Lincoln. He fired the pistol at point-blank range. President Lincoln was shot 2 inches behind the left ear in the hair. The bullet probably lodged itself behind the bone of Abraham Lincoln's right eye socket. President Lincoln never spoke again. John Wilkes Booth dropped the gun. Major Rathbone, upon seeing the commotion, he jumped up from the couch in there and he attempted to grab Mr. Booth. Major Rathbone was stabbed in the upper left arm. His injury was also serious. Then John Wilkes Booth jumped from the box onto the stage. At some point that evening, John Wilkes Booth broke his leg. Most people believe that he broke it while jumping, but there is another story that goes that his horse fell on him later on that evening. John Wilkes Booth originated both of those answers. There was a single actor standing here when Mr. Booth landed. His name was Harry Hawk, but he simply backed away, confused. Upon correcting himself, John Wilkes Booth walked very deliberately center stage. He was still wielding the dagger, which he raised over his shoulder. Then he yelled out. John Wilkes Booth almost assuredly yelled a Latin phrase from the stage. The words that John Wilkes Booth yelled were, "Sic semper tyrannis." That is a reference to the most famous political assassination of all. That is a reference to the assassination of Julius Caesar. Upon saying those words, John Wilkes Booth fled backstage. He left out of the same door he'd entered much earlier. Only about a minute of time had elapsed between Mr. Booth pulling the trigger and his exit from the building. So Mr. Booth had turned his back to the audience and was fleeing when screams came from up there. John Wilkes Booth did slightly injure 2 other people, but he was able to escape on horseback.
After he was shot, to get him out of all the confusion in the theater, they tried to move him, but ran into a crowd in the street, and so somebody at the Peterson boarding house across the street motioned to them to come in there, and that's where they took him. We'll be going in there now.
I can tell you right now that this is where they brought the president after he was assassinated, across the street at the Ford's Theater. It was the closest place where there was a bed. The doctors determined that the wound was mortal. He would not survive. They carried right back to the hospital. One of the tenants here motioned the group and said that there was a back bedroom that was available. So Lincoln would spend his last few hours here in Peterson House and pass the next morning at 7:22. The front parlor where you are now is where Mrs. Lincoln spent most of her time. The back parlor next to this is where they would start the investigation for who shot the president, and the last room that you go through is actually...
In this front parlor is where Mary Todd Lincoln waited for news about her husband and his condition. And then in the next parlor, this is where Secretary of War Edwin Stanton started the investigation and looking for the men who did this. This is where Secretary Stanton had his meeting. And next we head to the back parlor where Lincoln was laid across a bed to be examined by the doctors. Going down. There was no question who had shot Lincoln. John Wilkes Booth was one of the most famous actors of his time, and everybody saw him fleeing. So they started looking for him immediately, even before Lincoln died. Funeral arrangements were being made soon after his death, even before the people were caught that had done this. It took them 12 days to catch up with John Wilkes Booth, and they caught up with him in a barn. He refused to give up and was shot and killed. David Harold was caught with him and later executed, along with Louis Powell and George Alderatz, and Mary Surratt also died, the first woman ever executed in the United States. This is a stack of all the books written about Lincoln. Now we're going to move down the street from the Peterson House to Madame Tussauds. Madame Tussauds in Washington, D.C.'s main exhibit is the President's Gallery, and they also have some performers and other famous people. Some presidents are very short, while others are much taller. Let's take a walk through history. And now it's time to leave Madame Tussauds and take the big bus to the Holocaust Museum. Next we'll get on the big red bus and we'll travel over to the Holocaust Museum, where we'll look around there some. The National Holocaust Memorial Museum was opened in 1993. When you enter the museum, you get an identity card for somebody who lived in that time, and you can follow how they lived and whether they lived. This is a 5-story museum. On the top floor, we find out about the Nazis' rise to power. Even in America, there was no place for the Jews fleeing the Nazis, even though we did try to publicize it in our newspaper what was happening. In Europe, many tried to help them. Anne Frank's family was hid for many years while she was there, and also Oskar Schindler tried to protect some of the Jews. The Nazis developed ways of measuring eye color and hair color in order to try and figure out who were really Jews, even if they didn't claim to be. On the 3rd floor, we find out about the final solution that the Nazis planned. They would take the Jews and put them into concentration areas and ghettos. This is the wall from the Warsaw Ghetto. Then they would take the Jews a few at a time, load them into wagons, and take them down to the train station, where they would load them on train cars to take to other camps. Once they arrived in the train cars, they were sorted and pictures were taken of those that might be able to work, and each was given an identification tag according to their classification. Those that couldn't do the slave labor were taken to the death chamber. Those who couldn't work were taken to the death areas. They'd be led underground into an area for them to disrobe in. After disrobing, they were taken to another chamber that looked like a shower facility, but Cyclone B gas, as you can see the man above, was dropped into the area and they were gassed and killed. Then they were lifted up to the cremation area where the bodies were destroyed. Anything of value like shoes or other things would be kept to use in the future. This somewhat looks like what the crematorium would have looked like, and these stones are from them bombing the crematorium so nobody could see what they had done. And here they burned some of the bodies trying to destroy evidence. The Nazis were so ashamed of what they had done. Some of them were taken on death marches. They would do this in order to flee ahead of the advancing Allied forces. To help us understand how many Jewish people died, a man had been taking pictures for 51 years of all the people born into the community. And as you look at the pictures, realized every single one of these died. Now we come to the second floor and see the tombstones destroyed by the Nazis that have been put together as art in this wall. Here also is the Hall of Remembrance. Here we have an eternal flame, and underneath it is the soil from the death camps and from various cemeteries around Europe where Americans fought to free the Jew. And let us remember, they came for the socialists, and I didn't speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists. I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. And now it's time to leave the Holocaust Museum and get on a big bus. This time we'll be on the Blue Route, for we'll be heading to Arlington and Arlington Cemetery. This will be the last time we're on any of the big bus routes, and this will be the Blue Route. We'll drive from the Holocaust Museum over to Pentagon City, drive past Pentagon, and on to Arlington Cemetery. We'll take the metro back to the hotel. On the way, we drive past the Jefferson Monument, and then we're on the bridge over the Potomac River, leaving D.C. and heading to Virginia. Those tall high-rises over there is where our hotel is. After we cross the river, there on our right is the Pentagon. Tomorrow we'll be back there for the 9/11 memorial. For today, we're just driving by. There in the distance is the Air Force Memorial. And then we go through an area called Pentagon Village. It's mainly apartment complexes, some offices, and a huge shopping mall.
Don't forget to close the curtains.
Now we head out of Pentagon Village and we head to Arlington Cemetery past the Pentagon. Up on the hill is Arlington House, which the cemetery is named after. It was the home of Robert E. Lee before the Civil War. We'll look up there later in our tour. We'll be starting our tour at the Visitor Center. This cemetery has 624 acres, making it the second largest national cemetery in the nation. This cemetery has over 420,000 graves at present, and 30 are being added every day on average. The airplane headed on 9/11 to hit the Pentagon flew over the visitor center. Here we'll buy the tickets that we need for our tour that we're going to be taking on the tram, and then we'll head out to get the tram to go look around the cemetery. This tour will take several hours, so let's get on board and listen to our guide.
Here's Jimmy. He'll make sure we get through the cemetery safely. The first stop on our journey takes us to the grave of President John F. Kennedy. But before we get rolling, just a few...
It's now time to head out and explore the cemetery. The cemetery is broken up into various sections. We'll not see all of them, but we'll be following the yellow route on this map. First off, we'll go from the Visitor Center to the Women in Military Service for America Memorial. As we pass through the gates, we'll see the 4 emblems for the military services.
Pioneered by the efforts of Brigadier General Wilma Vaught of the U.S. Air Force. Now there's actually a free museum inside of that half-circle monument. Wonderful exhibits in there showing the past, present, and future contributions of women in our armed services. So much as we go stop to stop throughout our cemetery. Now to our right-hand side, down in the valley, up the next far hill, you see here nothing but row upon row of the government-issued headstone. That headstone is provided to each service member buried here by the Department of Veteran Affairs and at the cost to the American taxpayer. On your left, you'll see some of the government stones, but you also see many larger headstones. Now, those are not from the government. Those are all paid for by private financing, whether it comes from the family of the deceased who lie at rest there or other organizations that wish that individual to have a larger stone.
You can see by the symbol on the gravestone the religion of the person who is buried there.
Stone. You're going to find both the government and private headstones throughout the entire cemetery.
Next, we'll be heading to the graves of the Kennedys.
Before his assassination, President Kennedy was right here at our cemetery taking a tour, just like all of you are today. While he was here, he stood on top of the highest hill, right in front of the Arlington House, overlooking our cemetery, more importantly, seeing that beautiful view of downtown Washington. As he stood there, he was heard to have said, "I could stay here forever." Admiring that view, of course, is what he meant. But it was because of those words. Only one day after his assassination in Dallas, Texas, his wife Jacqueline came back to our cemetery to find a suitable place to bury her husband. And she chose right at the base of the hill from the Arlington House. That way, her husband, our president, will forever and always face that beautiful view of our nation's capital.
And now our tram has arrived in front of Arlington House at the Kennedy graves, and it's time for us to get off and go exploring some.
Beyond that curved granite wall, that's where you're going to find the grave of President Kennedy in the eternal flame. Buried with him, of course, is his wife Jacqueline, as well as 2 of their infant children. Once you visit them, follow the stone path to the left there below the house, and you'll find the graves of his brothers, Robert F. Kennedy, as well as Senator Edward Kennedy. And right at the very end of that walkway, just before you hit the road, you'll find a memorial stone where no remains are buried for their oldest brother, Joe Kennedy Jr. His body lost during World War II and never recovered.
And then we take a quick look up at the Arlington House and get back on the tram and head out around the cemetery more. We'll be heading to the amphitheater and the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, but there's much to see before we get there.
On the right is the second largest group burial marker here in the cemetery. This is the USS Serpents Monument. The crypt beneath it contains the remains of 250 Coast Guardsmen who lost their lives when their ammunition ship exploded at Guadalcanal. This was the Coast Guard's biggest disaster. It's going to be the Air Force Memorial. These three tall spires represent a bomb burst formation. This is the missing man formation in honor of their fallen comrades. Also ahead of the vehicle on the left is Rear Admiral Robert Peary, marked by a globe. He is the man who's credited with discovering the North Pole. Directly beside him lay his African-American assistant Matthew Henson, who planted the flag there. Honors 150 Coast Guardsmen who lost their lives in two separate incidents within 10 days of each other. It is well ahead of the vehicle on the right. 110. If you look out of the left side of the vehicle, you'll notice that our government-issued headstones all line up perfectly, no matter which direction you're looking in. Front to back, left to right, even diagonal, with the battalion under review. Always at attention, always at the ready. Government-issued headstones are 42 inches long, with 24 inches above the ground of white Vermont marble, weighing roughly 230 pounds. And we are making our way to the Tomb of the Unknown. That tomb is guarded 24/7, 365 days a year. Rain, sleet, snow, or hail by the Army's 3rd Infantry Regiment. Takes a lot to become a tomb sentinel. It is a volunteer position, but you do still have to be the right height, the right weight, and only have a 32-inch waist.
Around the Memorial Amphitheater, you'll find many special memorials, including the Spanish-American War Memorial, the Maine Memorial, which features part of the mast of the Maine. You'll see the Canadian Cross of Sacrifice here, the Space Shuttle Challenger Memorial, and also the Iran Rescue Mission Monument. You'll also find Audie Murphy, the most decorated World War II soldier, with all of the medals that the U.S. Army gives out, plus many foreign ones also. Now let's look around the Memorial Amphitheater, and behind it is the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. Now let's go see the Tomb of the Unknown Soldiers. There's one from World War I, one from World War II, one from the Korean War, and the Vietnam War was identified and moved to his own grave. It has been guarded since July 2nd, 1937, and it doesn't matter what the weather is, it's guarded 24 hours a day, even in hurricanes. It's 21 seconds facing east, 21 seconds facing north. You move the gun to the side of the crowd to protect the tomb. You walk 21 steps. You stop and face east for 21 seconds, then south for 21 seconds, and then you do it all over again. This is to honor the people in the tomb. During the winter and night, the guard is changed every hour. In the summer, it's changed every 30 minutes with great precision. Let's watch.
Folks, you guys are good.
Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention, please? I am Sergeant Davenport of the 3rd Infantry Regiment, United States Army. Guard of Honor, Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. This ceremony that you are about to witness is the changing of the guard. In keeping with the dignity of this ceremony, it is requested that everyone remain silent and standing. Thank you. Forward! 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 Guards! Halt! Halt! Out! Ready! Hey! Hasten! Out! Halt! Halt! Ready! Hey! Pass on your orders. Halt! And order. Remain as directed. Order. Action. Ready! Hey! Reset. Halt! Right, shoulder, up. Right, head. Forward. Forward! Forward! Guard! Halt! All out!
And then back to the routine of 21 steps and 21-second pauses. After one more view across to the Capitol building, it's time to get on our tram and head to the Arlington House. As we arrive at Arlington House, we pass the E Pluribus Unum kiosk, and then we go out to see the tomb of Pierre Charles L'Enfant, the grave of the person who designed Washington, D.C. As mentioned before, Arlington House, with its great view, was the home of Robert E. Lee before the Civil War. He was offered to be commander of the Northern forces and turned them down, and so the Union took over his home. As the war drug on, they needed places to bury people. So Brigadier General Montgomery Meigs, who didn't like Lee anyway, decided to use his plantation as a cemetery, and he is one of the ones buried here. Over 16,000 soldiers were buried here during the Civil War. Actually, the house didn't belong to Lee himself, but to his wife, Mary Ann Randolph Custis, who inherited it from her parents. Let's take a look around the house and various exhibits that are here in the museum. Arlington House consists of 3 floors. On the first floor you find the morning room. Then we would find the office that Lee would have used, the white parlor for entertaining, the dining room, the family parlor in their private space, the bedroom of the Custuses, and the schoolroom for the kids. On the basement would be various service areas. On the second floor we would find the Lee's chamber, the boys' chamber for their 3 sons, and their 3 daughters' dressing room, and the chamber itself for them. It is now time to go out and explore some of the buildings behind the house that are used for kitchens and slave quarters. The Civil War Tomb of the Unknowns is the largest single burial in Arlington. The vault underneath it contains over 2,100 soldiers picked up off the battlefield of Manassas and never identified. And now we come back to the E Pluribus Unum kiosk, which is in front of Arlington House, and we wait on our tram to come pick us up. As our tram arrives, we'll be getting on board and heading to the back side of the cemetery where we'll see the Netherlands Carillon and the earliest grave. After the war, the story continues of Arlington House. Custis Lee, the son of Mary and Robert E. Lee, sued the federal government for his land back, said it was mistaken. Went to the Supreme Court and they agreed. So they paid him $150,000 so they didn't have to remove 16,000 graves.
Well painted on it to a more permanent stone marker. If your headboard was missing, you suddenly became one of the nearly 5,000 unknown here, and they gave you a stone block with a number stamped in it. That didn't look too good.
The Netherlands Carillon was given to our nation in remembrance of our deliverance of the Netherlands. Now we're going to head back to the Visitor Center to finish our tour.
So you can see this little tiny tree, just behind it are 5 markers. Those are the first 5 that were buried here. That was May 15, 1864. So that's where it all started, right there. Yep. It used to be called the Lower Cemetery.
And now we arrive back in the Visitor Center, and let's again remember those who have passed away serving their country. Now that we have finished our tour of Arlington Cemetery, we head to the Arlington Cemetery's metro station, where we'll catch the subway, ride back to the Roslyn station, and take the bus home. Here comes our subway now. And then off we go. We'll arrive at the Roslyn station, get on our bus, and head back to our hotel, ending day number 12.